The frigid winds of Vespera cut through Lyra's tattered armor like shards of glass. Her violet skin, once vibrant with the iridescent patterns that marked her Xylar heritage, now pulsed a dull gray, the color of acceptance, of surrender. She lay sprawled on the barren rock, unable to move, watching the alien sky with its 3 moons and unfamiliar constellations. How fitting that she would die beneath stars she couldn't name. The wounds in her side had finally stopped bleeding, but only because she had little blood left to lose. Her symbiotic connection to plant life, a biological trait all Xylar shared, found nothing to grasp in this desolate wasteland. Without that connection, her body was failing faster, unable to process the meager nutrients still flowing through her system. Lyra's thoughts drifted to Teresh, her most trusted advisor, whose betrayal had led to this exile. The memory of his voice still rang in her ears. The defeat was catastrophic, Commander. The Council needs a sacrifice to appease the masses. You understand, don't you? His expression had been almost apologetic as he'd slipped the sedative into her drink, as guards had dragged her semi-conscious body to the transport vessel. Sacrifice. The ancient Xylar custom. Send the cursed one to die alone, and prosperity would return. A bitter laugh escaped her cracked lips, turning into a painful cough that racked her body. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had risen through military ranks by outsmarting her enemies, by anticipating betrayal. Yet she'd never seen this coming. Not from Teresh. Not after everything they'd been through. The sky above darkened as another of Vespera's infamous dust storms approached. The atmospheric composition here was barely breathable for her species, thin and laced with compounds that burned her lungs with each breath. The storm would bring acid rain, but Lyra couldn't summon the energy to seek shelter. What was the point? In the distance, one of Vespera's indigenous predators let out a haunting cry. The creature, whatever it was, would find easy prey if it came her way. Lyra closed her eyes, feeling strangely calm. She had fought her entire life, fought for respect in a military that questioned female leadership, fought in battles across 3-star systems, fought to protect her people. Now, she could finally stop fighting. As consciousness began to slip away, a strange peace settled over her. This harsh planet would be her tomb, her body decomposing in a foreign soil with no ceremonial rites. No family to sing the ancestral farewell. But at least the pain would end. A distant sound penetrated her fading awareness, rhythmic, mechanical. Footsteps? No, impossible. Vespera was uninhabited except for its dangerous native fauna. The outpost ruins scattered across its surface had been abandoned centuries ago, their mysterious builders long gone. The sound grew louder. Definitely footsteps, accompanied by the faint hiss of what could only be an oxygen filtration system. Lyra forced her eyes open one last time, summoning what little strength remained. A silhouette loomed against the darkening sky, humanoid but unfamiliar. Through blurred vision, she made out a weathered environment suit, patched in several places. As consciousness slipped away, Lyra felt herself being lifted, warm hands supporting her broken body. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a human face, lines of concern etched around eyes that widened in surprise at finding her alive. A human. Here, on Vespera. And then nothing. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Cale Duncan had survived on Vespera for 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. Not that he bothered counting anymore. Time had become meaningless after the events that had driven him to this barren rock at the edge of charted space. A perfect place to disappear. His makeshift home, carved from the remnants of an ancient structure and reinforced with salvage from his damaged scout ship, offered minimal protection from Vespera's hostile environment. But it was enough. The thick stone walls of what might have once been a temple or observatory kept out the worst of the acid storms, and his jury-rigged purification system made the local water just barely drinkable. He hadn't expected to find the alien woman. His excursion that day had been purely practical, checking his perimeter sensors and gathering the strange, fibrous lichen that grew in the shadow of the crystalline formations to the east. The lichen, when properly processed, supplemented his dwindling ration supplies. Now, the alien lay on his cot, her breathing shallow but present. Kale sat nearby, cleaning his survey equipment while keeping a wary eye on his unexpected guest. He'd done what he could for her wounds with his limited medical supplies, disinfected the gashes in her side, applied synthetic skin patches, administered a broad-spectrum antibiotic that he hoped would work on her physiology. He had never seen a being quite like her. Humanoid in general structure, 2 arms, 2 legs, recognizable facial features, but distinctly alien. Her skin, now slightly less gray than when he'd found her, occasionally rippled with faint colors that seemed to correspond to her breathing patterns. The fine, tendril-like appendages that replaced what would be hair on a human moved subtly, even in stillness, as though sensing the environment. The decision to bring her back had been impulsive, contrary to the careful isolation he'd maintained for years. But leaving her to die hadn't been an option he could live with, not after everything. A soft moan from the cot pulled Kale from his thoughts. The alien's eyes fluttered open, startlingly large, with no visible pupils, just swirling patterns of silver against deep blue. Those eyes fixed on him, and her body immediately tensed. She moved with unexpected speed, rolling from the cot despite her injuries and pressing herself against the far wall. One hand clutched her wounded side while the other extended toward him, fingers splayed in what was unmistakably a defensive posture. A series of clicking sounds emerged from her throat, followed by what might have been words in an unknown language. Kale raised both hands slowly, palms outward. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm not going to hurt you." The alien skin flickered rapidly between gray and a deep, pulsing red. Her eyes darted around the shelter, assessing exits, potential weapons. The tactical evaluation of a trained fighter. "You were dying out there," Kale continued, knowing she couldn't understand but hoping his tone might convey peaceful intentions. He gestured toward her bandaged side. "I patched you up as best I could." When she tried to push herself further from him, her legs buckled. Kale moved forward instinctively to catch her, but froze when she made a harsh, warning sound. Instead, he slowly retrieved a container of water, placed it on the ground, and slid it toward her. "Water," he said, making a drinking motion. "It's safe. Filtered." The aliens stared at the container suspiciously, then at him. Their eyes locked in a silent assessment that stretched for several long moments. Finally, necessity seemed to overcome caution. She reached for the water, movements deliberate and cautious, never taking her eyes off him. Kale nodded encouragingly. "That's it. Small sips would be best." She sniffed the water before taking a tentative taste. After a moment, she drank deeply, desperation overcoming restraint. Some of the water spilled down her chin, and she wiped it away with a gesture that seemed oddly, touchingly familiar despite her alien features. When she finished, she placed the container on the ground and pushed it back toward him with a deliberate movement. It was a small gesture, but Kale recognized it for what it was, an acknowledgement, perhaps even the barest beginning of communication. Outside, the acid storm arrived in full force, pelting the shelter with caustic droplets that hissed against the stone. The alien flinched at the sound, her skin rippling momentarily to a muted orange. "We're safe in here," Kale said, gesturing to the walls. "Storm-proof, more or less." She didn't respond, but something in her posture shifted slightly. Not relaxation. She remained clearly on guard, but perhaps the faintest easing of immediate fear. Kale returned to his seat, moving slowly and keeping his distance. He had no idea what species she was, where she'd come from, or how she'd ended up alone and dying on Vespera. Those questions would have to wait. For now, they were 2 castaways in a hostile world, regarding each other across a gulf of suspicion, united only by the storm that raged against the walls that sheltered them both. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Lyra's mind raced despite her body's weakness. The human, at least she was fairly certain that's what he was, maintained his distance, which was both a relief and a strategic disadvantage. His shelter was small, with limited exits. If he decided to attack, Her current physical state would give her little chance of defense. Yet he had saved her life. That much was undeniable. 3 days had passed since she'd awakened in this stone dwelling. 3 days of cautious coexistence, of rudimentary attempts at communication, pointing, gesturing, occasional words that meant nothing to the other. 3 days of her wounds gradually healing, strength slowly returning. The human, Kale, she had gathered from his repeated pointing to himself, seemed content to share his limited resources. He prepared food that her system could tolerate, provided water, and changed her bandages with clinical efficiency that suggested some medical training. His touch during these procedures was impersonal, careful never to linger. Lyra observed him constantly, analyzing his patterns and behaviors. He moved with the measured precision of someone accustomed to conservation, of energy, of resources, of emotion. His eyes, a pale color she had no name, for in her language, revealed little, but she recognized the shadows in them. This was a being who had seen conflict, who carried invisible wounds. On the 4th day, as a relative calm settled over Vespera's surface, Kale motioned for her to follow him outside. Lyra hesitated, suspicious of his intentions, but curiosity won out. She followed, maintaining a safe distance. The landscape beyond the shelter was even more desolate than she remembered from her arrival. Jagged rock formations stretched toward the horizon, their surfaces glittering with mineral deposits. In the distance, massive crystalline structures caught the light of Vespera's sun, fracturing it into prismatic beams. The beauty was stark, alien, and somehow threatening. Kale pointed to various landmarks, speaking words she couldn't understand. Then he retrieved what appeared to be a makeshift tool and approached a patch of fibrous growth clinging to a nearby rock face. He carefully harvested the substance, placing it in a container at his belt. He turned to her, offering a handful of the growth. When she didn't respond, he placed a small piece in his mouth, chewed briefly, then spat it into his palm. He held out again, nodding encouragingly. Lyra understood. Food gathering, a survival skill. Cautiously, she accepted the offering, studying it before mimicking his actions. The taste was bitter, astringent, but not entirely unpleasant. When she didn't immediately become ill, she nodded her acknowledgement. A sound like distant thunder rumbled across the plain. Kale's head snapped toward the horizon, where dark clouds gathered with unnatural speed. His expression shifted to one of alarm. He gestured urgently toward the shelter, his movements suddenly sharp with urgency. Lyra didn't need translation to understand the danger. They began moving quickly back towards safety, but the storm advanced faster than anticipated. Within moments, the air filled with swirling particulate matter that stung Lyra's eyes and throat. Her skin prickled painfully as the first acidic droplets touched her exposed flesh. Kale grabbed her arm, pulling her forward as visibility decreased dramatically. The unexpected contact sent a jolt of alarm through her, but survival instinct overrode her aversion. They stumbled together through the thickening maelstrom, the shelter's entrance now barely visible. A massive shape emerged suddenly from the storm, a native creature driven from its den by the caustic precipitation. It moved on 6 legs, its armored exoskeleton glistening with moisture, mandibles clicking in agitation. It was at least twice Kale's height, and its forward momentum carried it directly into their path. Lyra reacted instinctively, shoving Kale aside as one of the creature's limbs swung toward them. The blow caught her across the shoulders, sending her sprawling across the rocky ground. Pain flared from her barely healed wounds, but training took over. She rolled to her feet, grabbing a jagged stone as she rose. Kale had drawn a crude weapon, a metal rod that hummed with energy at one end. He waved it toward the creature, tried to drive it back while shouting something to Lyra. Though she couldn't understand his words, his intent was clear: get to the shelter. Instead, Lyra circled to the creature's flank, looking for vulnerability in its natural armor. Finding a gap between plates, she drove her stone into the unprotected flesh with all her remaining strength. The creature emitted a high-pitched keen, pivoting with surprising speed. Kale used the distraction to strike with his charged rod, connecting with the same vulnerability Lyra had exploited. The combined attack drove the beast back, giving them the opening they needed. Together, they ran for the shelter, crashing through the entrance seconds before the creature recovered. Kale sealed the doorway, engaging a locking mechanism that looked cobbled together from disparate technologies. Inside, they both collapsed against opposite walls, breathing heavily, drenched in acidic rain that burned wherever it touched skin. Lyra's wounds had reopened, fresh blood seeping through her bandages. Across from her, Kale had suffered a gash across his forehead that bled freely. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, adrenaline gradually subsiding. Then, unexpected, Kale's mouth curved slightly upward. He made a sound, not quite laughter, but close, and gestured between them, then toward the sealed door, shaking his head. Despite everything, Lyra found herself responding in kind, a sound of wry acknowledgement escaping her. They had fought together, instinctively coordinating their actions against a common threat. It was not entirely unpleasant. Outside, the creature scrabbled against the shelter's walls before the intensifying storm drove it away. Inside, Human and Xyler began the process of treating each other's wounds, movement still cautious but tinged now with something that, in different circumstances, might almost be called respect. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 2 weeks after finding the alien woman, Kale awoke to find her examining the broken communications array he'd salvaged from his ship. Her long fingers moved deftly over the components, rearranging connections with a confidence that suggested technical expertise. "Good morning," he said, sitting up from his sleeping mat. She looked up, acknowledging him with a nod that had become their standard greeting. Over the days, a rudimentary system of communication had developed between them, a hybrid of gestures, simplified words, and mutual observation. They remained wary of each other, but the sharp edge of suspicion had dulled through necessity and proximity. He'd learned that her name was Lyra, or at least that was the closest approximation his human vocal cords could manage. She'd learned to alert him to approaching storms before his instruments detected them, her skin shifting to a deep purple that he now recognized as an indicator of atmospheric pressure changes. "Broken?" she asked, gesturing to the communications equipment. Her grasp of his language was improving daily, though her pronunciation remained distinctly alien, clicking consonants where humans had none. Kale nodded, moving to join her. "Beyond repair, I think." EMP from the crash fried most of the circuitry. She tilted her head, the gesture he'd come to recognize as confusion at unfamiliar terms. "Energy surge," he simplified. "Destroyed." Understanding flickered across her features. She pointed to a specific component. "This, not destroyed. Disconnected." Kale looked more closely. She was right. What he'd taken for burn damage was actually corrosion from exposure. The primary coupling was intact, but had separated from its housing. "You know this technology?" he asked, surprised. Lyra's skin rippled briefly with amber tones, her equivalent of shrug, he'd learned. "Similar." "Xyler, my people use." She hesitated, then added, "I was fighter, ship commander." The revelation struck Kale with unexpected force. Not just an alien, then, but a military officer. Someone who had led others in battle, who had made the kind of decisions that changed and ended lives. Someone, perhaps, not so different from who he had once been. He studied her with new eyes. The way she moved, always aware of her surroundings. The discipline in her posture, even when injured. The tactical assessment that was second nature to her. It all made sense now. "I was military too," he found himself saying. "Earth Special Forces, Xenobiological Research Division." Her expression remained unreadable, but he noted the subtle shift in her posture, a slight tensing. Of course, to her, human military might represent a threat, not a commonality. "Not anymore," he clarified quickly. "I left after Proxima Centauri." The name meant nothing to her, but something in his tone must have conveyed the weight it carried. She studied him intently, her large, silver-blue eyes unblinking. "Why?" You here? Alone? She finally asked. The question was one he'd avoided asking himself for 3 years. Exile, escape, penance, all applied. None fully captured the truth. My team was researching biological compounds on Proxima Centauri 4, he said slowly, surprised at his willingness to speak of it. We discovered a substance with remarkable properties, cellular regeneration rates beyond anything in our databases. The military applications were significant. He paused, memories surfacing that he'd tried to bury. We didn't realize the compound was sentient, or that extracting it caused pain to the organisms that produced it. By the time we understood, his voice trailed off. Mistake, Lyra offered, her tone neither accusatory nor sympathetic. Simply acknowledging, yes, a mistake that cost lives when the organisms defended themselves. My team, the colonial settlement nearby, he stopped abruptly. I was the only survivor. When I recovered, I took a scout ship and left. Kept going until I found somewhere no one would look. The confession hung in the air between them. Cale waited for judgment, for the contempt he still held for himself to be reflected in her alien eyes. Instead, Lyra's skin shifted to a deep blue he hadn't seen before. She placed a hand on her side, where her wounds had left fresh scars. I understand exile, she said slowly. My people, defeated in battle. Council needed sacrifice, someone to blame. Her expression hardened. Teresh, my second, betrayed me. Poison, then sent here to die. The simple narrative contained volumes of pain, a betrayal that matched or exceeded his own. Cale found himself nodding, a connection forming that transcended species. So we're both running from something, he said quietly. Not running now, she corrected. Surviving. The distinction felt important somehow. Before he could respond, a faint but distinct beeping sound came from the sensor array near the shelter. Entrance. Cale moved quickly to check the readings, tension immediately returning to his posture. What? Lyra asked, instantly alert. Movement. East perimeter. He checked the coordinates. Near the crystal formations. Too large to be indigenous fauna. Lyra joined him at the display, her expression grave. Ship. Can't tell yet, but something entered the atmosphere. He began gathering equipment, his energy rod, portable scanner, water purifier. We need to investigate. Could be nothing. Could be. Found, she finished for him, the single word heavy with implication. Their eyes met in perfect understanding. The fragile peace they'd established on Vespera might be coming to an end. Whatever, or whoever, had arrived, it represented change, potential threat. To both of them. We go together, Lyra stated firmly, already collecting her own makeshift weapons. Cale knew he should argue, insist she stay behind in her still weakened state. But the determination in her stance brooked no argument. And truthfully, he realized he wanted her with him. Whatever awaited them, they would face it as they had faced the storm and the creature, side by side. Together, he agreed, and they stepped out into Vespera's harsh daylight, moving with the synchronized caution of two predators in unfamiliar territory. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The crystalline formations rose like massive shattered teeth from Vespera's barren plain, refracting sunlight in disorienting patterns. Lyra and Cale approached cautiously, using the smaller outcroppings as cover. The sensor had detected movement in this area, but the bizarre magnetic properties of the crystals interfered with precise readings. There, Lyra whispered, pointing to a disturbance in the dust near the largest formation. Fresh tracks, not matching any indigenous species they had encountered. Cale nodded, indicating they should circle around to approach from different angles. The silent coordination that had developed between them over weeks of shared survival now served them in this moment of potential confrontation. Lyra moved left while Cale took the right flank, both keeping low to the ground. As she navigated between crystal shards, Lyra's mind raced with possibilities. Had the Xylar Council sent someone to confirm her death? Was this a human vessel, perhaps searching for Cale? Either scenario presented danger, not just to her, but to him as well. The realization that she factored his safety into her calculations came with a jolt of surprise. When had the human become more than just a temporary ally of convenience? A movement ahead snapped her attention back to the present. A figure emerged from behind the central crystal formation. Humanoid, wearing an environmental suit similar to what Kale had worn when he found her, but newer, unmarked by years of use. The figure carried a scanner, methodically sweeping the area. Lyra signaled to Kale using hand gestures they'd established. One unknown, armed, searching pattern. He acknowledged from his position, indicating he'd move closer to identify. Before either could advance, a mechanical whine cut through the air. A small drone rose from behind the crystals, hovering briefly before beginning a grid-pattern search outward from the humanoid figure's position. Its sensors would detect them within moments. Decision time collapsed to seconds. Lyra calculated odds, trajectories, outcomes. The unknown represented potential danger, but engaging without information was equally risky. The drone, however, would eliminate their advantage of surprise. She acted instinctively, grabbing a fist-sized rock and hurling it with precision. It struck the drone, knocking it off balance but not disabling it. The device emitted a shrill alarm, spinning to identify the threat. The humanoid figure whirled toward the sound, drawing a weapon. Everything accelerated. Kale emerged from cover, energy rod activated, advancing rapidly. The figure turned toward this new threat, weapon rising. Lyra used the distraction to sprint forward, closing the distance in seconds. She launched herself in a flying tackle, a combat move drilled into her through years of military training. They crashed to the ground together, Lyra pinning the unknown assailant with practiced efficiency. The environmental helmet cracked against rock, the faceplate fracturing to reveal a human face. Female, wide-eyed with shock and fear. "Don't move," Kale commanded, arriving with his weapon trained on the stranger. "Identify yourself." The woman's eyes darted between them, lingering with particular shock on Lyra's alien features. "Dr. Maya Sato," she gasped. "Independent researcher. Please, I'm not a threat." Lyra maintained her hold, but exchanged a glance with Kale. His expression mirrored her own skepticism. Independent researchers don't typically carry military-grade scanners or defense drones, Kale observed coldly. "Try again." The woman, Maya, closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, fear had been replaced by resignation. Exoplanetary Resources Corporation. Geological Survey Division. I was sent to assess Vespera's mineral potential, specifically the crystalline formations. "Alone?" Lyra asked, her suspicion evident. Maya's eyes widened slightly at hearing Lyra speak. Yes. Preliminary survey only. The corporation sends solo scouts to minimize investment risk on frontier worlds." "Your ship," Kale pressed. "Automated long-range shuttle. Parked 3 kilometers east in a ravine. Minimal life support, just enough for one person and sample storage." Lyra studied the human woman's face, searching for signs of deception. Among Xylar, skin color would reveal lies, but human physiological responses were more subtle. Still, years of command had honed her ability to read micro-expressions across species. "She speaks truth," Lyra finally said to Kale, though she maintained her restraining hold. "But not all truth." Maya's face flushed. "I'm not hiding anything relevant to you. I didn't even know anyone was on this planet. All scans showed it as uninhabited except for indigenous wildlife. And yet here we are," Kale said dryly. "What else aren't you telling us, Dr. Sato?" The woman hesitated. "The corporation isn't just interested in mining. The crystalline structures show unusual properties. Energy absorption and amplification capacities beyond anything in our database. There are rumors of weapons development programs." "Of course there are," Kale muttered, a bitter edge creeping into his voice. "I was supposed to collect samples and data. Nothing more," Maya insisted. "I'm a scientist, not a soldier." Lyra finally released her hold, allowing the woman to sit up, but remaining poised to restrain her again if necessary. "Scientists make weapons," she stated flatly. "Scientists make death." Maya didn't argue the point. "What are you, she asked Lyra instead, scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. I've never encountered your species in any database. She's Xyler, Kale answered before Lyra could speak. And she's not a research subject. The protectiveness in his tone caught Lyra by surprise. She glanced at him, noting the tension in his posture, the warning in his eyes as he regarded Maya. I didn't mean, Maya began, then stopped herself. Look, I have no quarrel with either of you. I just want to complete my survey and leave. You don't need to worry about me revealing your presence here. As far as the corporation knows, this planet is uninhabited, and I have no reason to tell them otherwise. Except that you report to them, Kale pointed out. And corporations value resources over people. Always have. You think I don't know that? A flash of genuine anger crossed Maya's face. Why do you think I requested solo assignment on a frontier world? The further from corporate oversight, the better. Lyra and Kale exchanged another look, a silent communication passing between them. The woman represented complication, potential threat, but also possibility. Information from the outside, perhaps even a means of leaving Vespera, if that was what they wanted. If. The qualifier hung unspoken in Lyra's thoughts. We take her, Lyra finally decided, her tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Question more. Decide later. Kale nodded agreement. Your equipment stays here, he told Maya. We'll retrieve it later if necessary. But my samples are not your priority right now. Kale cut her off, gesturing with his weapon. Your priority is convincing us you're not a threat. Maya looked as though she might protest further, but wisdom prevailed. She nodded reluctantly, rising to her feet when Lyra allowed it. Together, the three figures made their way back across the barren landscape. Two exiles and an intruder, moving toward an uncertain confrontation and decisions that would shape all their futures. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Night fell over Vespera, the planet's 3 moons casting overlapping shadows across the landscape. Inside the shelter, an uneasy atmosphere prevailed as Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, hands visible, watched carefully by Lyra while Kale examined the data pad they'd taken from her. Your corporation has detailed maps of this sector, he observed, scrolling through files. More detailed than should be possible given the limited exploration in this region. Maya shifted uncomfortably. The Exoplanetary Resources Corporation has partnerships with various governmental entities, access to data not available to the public. Military data, Lyra stated flatly, recognizing the patterns. On the screen, she could see topographical overlays similar to those used in Xyler combat planning. I don't ask where the information comes from, Maya replied, a defensive edge in her voice. I'm a geologist, not a strategist. Kale made a non-committal sound, continuing to browse. Your personal logs mention a secondary objective. Care to elaborate on that? Maya's expression tightened. You have no right to read my private entries. And your corporation has no right to exploit worlds beyond its jurisdiction, Kale countered. Yet here we are. A tense silence fell. Lyra observed the human woman's reactions carefully. Despite her claim of being a mere scientist, Maya carried herself with a confidence that suggested more complex experience. There was something in her demeanor that reminded Lyra of certain intelligence operatives she had encountered during her military career, a careful balance of revealed and concealed information. The crystals, Lyra prompted, deciding on directness. What do they do? Maya hesitated, then sighed. They appear to amplify and redirect energy in unique ways. Early tests suggest they could revolutionize power generation, communications, or weapons systems, depending on application. My job was to determine if they could be harvested sustainably and in sufficient quantity to justify a full extraction operation. And the secondary objective? Kale pressed. Another hesitation, longer this time, to investigate anomalous signals detected periodically from this region, possibly artificial in origin, possibly related to the crystal formations. The corporation thought they might indicate remnant technology from whoever built the structures on this planet. This new information changed the calculation. Lyra and Kale exchanged glances, a wordless communication that had become second nature. You detected signals? Kale asked, setting down the datapad. From where? That's what I was trying to determine when you found me, Maya admitted. They're intermittent, seemingly random in duration and strength. But they always originate somewhere within the largest crystal formation. Lyra's mind raced with implications. If Vespera held remnant technology from an advanced civilization, it could represent either opportunity or grave danger. The abandoned structure she'd glimpsed during her time here had struck her as oddly familiar in some ways, though she'd been too focused on survival to give them much thought. Who else knows about these signals? She demanded. Just my direct supervisor. It's not in the official survey parameters. Maya's expression turned troubled. Look, I know how this sounds, but I'm genuinely interested in the scientific implications, not whatever military applications the corporation might develop. That's why I've been documenting everything in personal logs separate from official reports. Insurance? Kale suggested, his tone indicating he understood such precautions. Maya nodded. Or evidence, if necessary. I'm not naive about who I work for. The admission shifted something in the atmosphere of the small shelter. Not trust, exactly, but perhaps a tentative alignment of interests. Lyra felt the subtle change, noted how Kale's posture relaxed marginally. Your ship, Lyra said, focusing on practical matters. Communication capabilities? Limited to short-range transmissions, unless within relay range of a corporate satellite. There's none in this sector. Supplies? Standard solo survey package. Enough for one person for 30 days. Less with 3 sharing. Weapons. Maya met Lyra's gaze directly. A standard sidearm for wildlife defense. Nothing that would be effective against anything seeking to do real harm. The implication hung in the air. She was not equipped for combat against other sentient beings. Whether this represented truth or calculated information control remained uncertain. We need to decide what to do with you, Kale said, breaking the contemplative silence. And quickly, if your corporation expects regular check-ins, your absence will eventually trigger a response. 3-day reporting schedule, Maya confirmed. But given Vespera's electromagnetic anomalies, delays are expected. They won't send anyone for at least 2 weeks. Lyra absorbed this information, calculating options. They had a brief window to determine their course of action, to use the woman's presence somehow, or ensure she couldn't threaten their safety. Before she could voice her thoughts, a distant rumble shook the shelter, dust dislodging from the ancient ceiling. All 3 tensed, but this was no ordinary Vesperan storm. The vibration held a mechanical regularity that raised the hair on Lyra's arms. That's not geological, Maya whispered, scientific interest momentarily overriding her precarious situation. That's a ship, Kale finished, moving quickly to the crude periscope he'd constructed to observe the surrounding area without exposing himself. Large, military configuration. His voice tightened. Not Earth design. Lyra joined him, taking her turn at the viewport. What she saw sent a cold wave of dread through her core. The distinctive silhouette against the moonlit sky was unmistakable, a Xylar enforcement vessel, typically used for high-priority retrievals or executions. They found me, she whispered, instinctively shifting to the Xylar language in her shock. Kale didn't need translation to understand. You recognize it? She nodded grimly. Xylar, hunter ship, elite unit. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. They never send such vessels unless retrieval is absolute priority. Maya looked between them, confusion and fear evident in her expression. What's happening? Who are they looking for? Me, Lyra answered simply, her skin pulsing with dark colors that reflected her inner turmoil. The sacrifice escaped death. That cannot be allowed. Or me, Kale added grimly. Earth military has bounties on deserters. They could have contracted Xylar hunters. Or neither of you, Maya suggested, earning surprised looks from both. The signals I detected, if others intercepted them, too. The implications hung heavy in the small space. Whatever the ancient civilization of Vespera had left behind might be valuable enough to attract various factions. Their presence here could be coincidental to a larger objective. Doesn't matter why, Lyra decided, already gathering essential supplies. They will find us. This shelter too obvious. Kale nodded agreement, moving with practiced efficiency. The western caverns. We mapped them last week. Multiple exits, water source, defensible. Wait, Maya interjected, rising to her feet. My ship, if we could reach it, we might be able to leave the planet entirely. 3 kilometers across open terrain, with a hunter ship overhead. Kale's tone made clear what he thought of those odds. Better than hiding in caves until they find us, Maya countered. Those ships have thermal imaging, motion sensors. And I know they're blind spots, Lyra interrupted. They're scanning patterns. I commanded similar units. A moment of silence as this information registered. Then Kale nodded, decision made. We head for the ship. Best chance for all of us. He fixed Maya with a hard stare. But understand this. Any sign you're compromising our safety, and we leave you behind. To her credit, the scientist didn't flinch. Understood. But my shuttle can only accommodate 2 comfortably. 3 will be intimate. We've survived worse, Lyra stated flatly, securing a makeshift weapon at her side. Discomfort is preferable to death. As they prepared to leave the relative safety of the shelter, Kale paused beside Lyra. For the first time since she'd known him, uncertainty showed clearly on his face. You're sure about this? He asked quietly. Leaving Vespera? The question carried layers of meaning. Here, despite the planet's hostility, they had found a kind of peace, a simple existence free from the complications of their pasts. Leaving meant facing whatever awaited them in a universe that had already rejected them both once. Lyra's skin shifted briefly to a deep indigo, a color Kale had never seen her display before. Not sure, she admitted. But together, we face whatever comes. The simple declaration seemed to steady him. He nodded once, resolutely. Together, with the Xylar ship's engines creating a distant but distinct backdrop of sound, the 3 unlikely allies slipped from the shelter in a Vespera's unforgiving night. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. They moved through darkness like ghosts, utilizing the planet's strange topography for cover. Lyra led the way, her Xylar vision better adapted to low light conditions than her human companions. Behind her, Kale maintained a vigilant watch for indigenous predators, while Maya followed, struggling occasionally with the difficult terrain but never complaining. The hunter ship had landed approximately 2 kilometers north of their position, its searchlights periodically sweeping the landscape. Each time the beams approached, the 3 pressed themselves into whatever cover was available, freezing until the danger passed. They're using standard search grid patterns, Lyra whispered during one such pause. Methodical. They don't know exactly where to look. Small mercies, Kale muttered, helping Maya over a particularly treacherous rock formation. How much farther to your ship, Doctor? Just beyond that ridge, Maya replied, gesturing toward a dark silhouette against the starlit sky. There's a narrow ravine where I concealed it. As they approached the ridge, Lyra signaled for a halt, her body suddenly tense. Movement ahead, she warned. Not natural. They crouched behind a cluster of crystalline outcroppings, watching as 2 figures in distinctive Xylar combat armor materialized from the shadows. The hunters moved with predatory grace, weapons ready, communicating with each other via subtle hand gestures that Lyra recognized all too well. Elite unit, she confirmed softly. They're securing the perimeter. Standard protocol when valuable targets are involved. How many in a typical team? Kale asked, his military training evident in the precision of his question. 6. Commander, pilot 4. Hunters. Lyra's expression darkened. They're splitting up to cover more ground. That means they're confident. Or in a hurry, Maya suggested. Could we use that? Create a diversion. Kale considered this, then nodded slowly. The crystal formations. You said they amplify energy? Maya nodded. Dramatically, under the right conditions. If we could trigger some kind of energy surge, something to register on their sensors as a significant anomaly. They would investigate, Lyra finished, understanding his thinking. Xyler protocols prioritize unusual energy signatures. Potential weapons or technology always outrank fugitive retrieval. I might be able to help with that, Maya said, reaching into a hidden pocket of her environmental suit. She produced a small device, no larger than her palm. Survey charge. We use them to test mineral reactivity. Low yield, but if placed correctly within the crystal matrix, it could cascade, Kale concluded. But someone would need to place and trigger it, then get clear before the hunters respond. The unspoken question hung in the air. Who would take such a risk? I'll do it, Maya volunteered, surprising them both. I know exactly where to place the charge for maximum effect. You two get to the ship and prepare for launch. Lyra studied the human woman skeptically. Why would you help us? You could wait for us to be captured, then continue your mission. Maya's expression hardened. Because I've seen enough to know I want no part in whatever those hunters are here for. And because she hesitated. Because whatever technology they've detected on this planet shouldn't belong to any single government or corporation. Some discoveries are too important. It wasn't a complete answer, but there was genuine conviction in her voice. Lyra exchanged a glance with Kale, who gave a slight nod. Ship access codes? He asked. Biometric, Maya replied. But there's an emergency override. She quickly explained the procedure, detail, and technical precision, suggesting she was indeed who she claimed to be. Time frame, Lyra pressed. The charge needs 3 minutes to reach optimal energy state once placed. After detonation, you'll have maybe 5 minutes before they realize it's a diversion. Kale handed Maya his energy rod. Take this. More effective than that sidearm if you encounter trouble. The gesture seemed to surprise Maya. She accepted the weapon with a nod of acknowledgement. We'll wait until you're in position, Lyra decided. 3 short flashes from that outcropping. She indicated a distinctive rock formation. Then we move for the ship. The plan set. Maya slipped away, using the techniques she'd observed from them to move quietly through the alien landscape. Lyra and Kale watched until she disappeared behind a cluster of crystal shards. You trust her? Lyra asked quietly. No, Kale answered honestly. But I believe her interests align with ours for now. And sometimes that's enough. They waited in tense silence, scanning for hunter movement while watching for Maya's signal. Minutes stretched, feeling like hours. If this works, Kale said suddenly, his voice barely audible, we'll need a destination. Somewhere to go. Lyra hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. The concept of a future beyond immediate survival seemed almost dangerous to contemplate. I cannot return to Xyler space, she said finally. And you to human territories? Kale shook his head. Not directly. They're independent colonies, though. Places where species intermingle, where questions aren't asked if you have skills to offer. And we have skills, Lyra observed dryly. A ghost of a smile crossed Kale's face. That we do. 3 quick flashes of light from the distant outcropping interrupted their exchange. Maya had reached her position. Now we find out if the scientist keeps her word, Lyra murmured, rising into a crouch. Together, they began making their way toward the ravine and the promise of escape, as behind them, a small device nestled among alien crystals began its countdown. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The ravine was deeper than it had appeared from a distance. Its walls composed of the same crystalline material that dotted the landscape, but in a more concentrated formation. Maya's shuttle sat at the bottom, a sleek, compact vessel designed for atmosphere-to-orbit transitions rather than long-distance travel. Lyra assessed it with a professional eye as they descended the narrow path to the ravine floor. Corporate scout vessel. Limited range, but well-armed for its size. Can you fly it? Kale asked, keeping watch for pursuit. Similar enough to designs I know, she confirmed. If the override works. They reached the ship just as a distant rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. A flash of blue-white light illuminated the night sky, followed by a shockwave that sent cascades of crystal shards raining down around them. Impressive, Kale muttered, shielding his eyes from the glare. Your scientist friend knows her demolitions. Lyra was already at the shuttle's external panel, inputting the override sequence Maya had provided. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hiss, the entry hatch slid open. Inside, she ordered, checking the ravine entrance one last time before following Kale into the vessel. The shuttle's interior was cramped but efficiently designed, with a pilot station, a small research area convertible to additional seating, and secured storage compartments. Lyra moved immediately to the controls, familiarizing herself with the layout while Kale secured the hatch. Life support shows adequate levels, she reported, activating systems. Fuel at 78%, enough to reach orbit and achieve escape velocity. And then, Kale asked, strapping himself into the secondary position. Lyra's hands moved deftly across the unfamiliar controls. Navigation system has coordinates for multiple corporate outposts. We avoid those. But there's a trading hub in the Alcyone sector. Neutral territory. A sudden proximity alert interrupted their planning. Something was approaching the ravine at high speed. Maya, Kale suggested hopefully. Lyra checked the external cameras. Two armored figures moved within human speed toward their position, weapons drawn. Hunters, she corrected grimly. They didn't all respond to the diversion. Kale accessed the weapons system, familiarizing himself with the controls. We can't wait. If they damage the engines. I know. Lyra cut him off, accelerating the launch sequence. But Maya, the decision was made for them as energy blasts began impacting the shuttle's hull. Warning lights flashed across the console. Shield integrity at 85% and falling, Kale reported. They're using concentrated fire on the engine housing. With no time for the standard launch procedure, Lyra engaged emergency thrusters, a dangerous maneuver in the confined space of the ravine. The shuttle lurched upward, scraping against crystal walls as it ascended. Through the external cameras, they watched the hunters grow smaller below them. One raised a weapon that Lyra recognized with dread. "Brace!" she shouted, attempting evasive action despite the ravine's constraints. The impact when it came was catastrophic. The shuttle spun wildly, systems flickering as the electromagnetic pulse disrupted circuitry. Lyra fought the controls, using all her combat experience to stabilize their ascent. "Hull breach in storage section," Kale reported, his voice steady despite the chaos. Automated seals engaged. Engine output at 60%. They cleared the ravine just as a second shot grazed their left thruster. Lyra pushed the remaining engines beyond safety parameters, clawing for altitude and speed. The shuttle shuddered around them, protesting the abuse. "We're being pursued," Kale announced, watching the tactical display. "Hunter ship lifting off. Intercept course." Lyra didn't respond, all her focus on keeping their damaged vessel airborne long enough to escape Vespera's atmosphere. The shuttle climbed through turbulent cloud layers, frame groaning under the strain. "What about Maya?" Kale asked quietly. "No bio signs detected in range," Lyra answered, her tone deliberately neutral. "But sensors are damaged. Cannot confirm." They both knew what that likely meant. The scientist had either been captured or killed after setting off her diversion. Either way, they could do nothing for her now. As they broke through the upper atmosphere into the star-strewn darkness of space, proximity alarms blared again. The Hunter ship was gaining rapidly, its superior engines easily outpacing their damaged shuttle. "They'll be in weapons range in 57 seconds, Kale calculated. Lyra's mind raced through options, most ending in their capture or destruction. Then her eyes fell on the navigation display, specifically on the massive crystalline formations they had just passed over. "The signals Maya detected," she said suddenly, "coming from the crystals. If they amplify energy." Kale caught her meaning immediately. They might interfere with targeting systems. Without hesitation, Lyra swung the shuttle into a steep dive, heading back toward Vespera's surface. The sudden maneuver caught their pursuers off guard, buying precious seconds. Diverting all remaining power to engines and forward shields, Kale announced, making the adjustments. "Aft shields at minimum." The Hunter ship fired, a precision shot that would have crippled them completely had they maintained their previous course. As it was, the blast grazed their already damaged left thruster, sending them into a controlled spiral that Lyra converted into deliberate evasive action. They skimmed just above the massive crystal formations, so close that the shuttle's underside scraped the uppermost shards. The hunter ship followed, closing the distance with methodical precision. On my mark, Lyra instructed, release the fuel cells in Storage Bay 3. Kale looked at her sharply. That's our reserve. Without it, we won't need it if we're captured. She cut him off. Ready. He nodded, fingers poised over the emergency jettison controls. Lyra waited until the hunter ship was directly behind them, committing to its pursuit course. Now, Kale released the fuel cells, which tumbled into the crystal field below. Simultaneously, Lyra fired the shuttle's small defensive weapon, not at their pursuers, but at the discarded fuel. The resulting explosion was magnified 100-fold as the crystals amplified and redirected the energy in unpredictable patterns. A blinding flash enveloped the hunter ship, which had been too close to evade the energy cascade. Its shields failed under the onslaught, systems overloading. It veered sharply, losing altitude before the pilots could regain control. Lyra didn't waste the opportunity. She pulled the shuttle into a steep ascent, pushing their damaged engines to their absolute limit. Behind them, the hunter ship struggled to recover, temporarily blinded and disoriented. It worked, Kale said, a note of disbelief in his voice as they broke free of Vespera's atmosphere once more. They're not pursuing. Yet, Lyra qualified, already calculating their next move. They will recover. And this ship, she gestured to the damage indicators glowing across the console, cannot outrun them in open space. Options. Nearest jump point is 3 hours at maximum speed. We cannot maintain that long enough to reach it. She studied the navigation charts. But there is a debris field from an old asteroid mining operation. We could hide there, attempt repairs. Kale nodded agreement, and hoped the hunters give up the search. They both knew it was unlikely. Elite Xylar hunters were selected for their persistence as much as their combat skills. But it was their only viable plan with the shuttle in its current condition. Setting course for the debris field, Lyra finally allowed herself a moment to absorb what had happened. They had escaped Vespera, the place of her intended death, the place of Kale's self-imposed exile. Whatever came next, they faced it not as commander and deserter, not as Xylar and human, but as survivors bound by shared struggle. As the blue-green sphere of Vespera receded behind them, Lyra felt an unexpected pang. For all its hostility, the planet had given her something she'd never expected to find again after her betrayal. Trust. In Kale, in herself, in the possibility of a future. Beside her, Kale monitored their faltering systems, his expression focused but calm. When he caught her watching him, a question formed in his eyes, one that needed no translation across species. No regrets, she assured him, her skin rippling briefly with colors that he had come to recognize as determination mixed with something gentler. We chose this path together. His answering nod carried the weight of understanding. Whatever awaited them among the stars, they would face it as they had faced the storms and hunters of Vespera. Side by side, two castaways who had found in each other what their own worlds had failed to provide: acceptance without condition, strength without domination, and perhaps, though neither would yet name it, the beginnings of something like love. As the shuttle limped toward the distant debris field, alarms still sounding warnings they chose to ignore for the moment, Lyra reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She had closed her eyes on Vespera's barren surface, expecting death, accepting its finality. Instead, she had opened them to find a human holding her, offering life. Now, countless light years from the homes that had rejected them both, they charted a new course into uncertainty. But for the first time since her exile, Lyra faced the unknown not with resignation, but with purpose. Whatever came next, she would meet it with open eyes. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The debris field appeared first as scattered points of light against the void, growing into a chaotic maze of twisted metal, fractured asteroids, and abandoned mining equipment as they approached. Lyra guided their damaged shuttle into the densest section, where sensor shadows would provide maximum concealment. Life support failing in sections 3 and 4, Kale reported, his voice tight with concentration as he rerouted critical systems. Hull integrity stable, but compromised. Main power at 23% and falling. Lyra nodded acknowledgement, expertly maneuvering between a massive chunk of ore processing equipment and the hollowed-out shell of what might once have been a storage facility. The shuttle's engines stuttered alarmingly as she reduced power. This position provides 340 degrees of coverage, she announced, bringing them to a relative stop within the protective shadow of a particularly large debris cluster. Minimal energy signatures detectable from outside the field. With immediate navigation concerns addressed, they both sat in momentary silence, allowing the reality of their situation to settle. The shuttle's emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow, highlighting the damage visible throughout the cockpit. Sparking panels, flickering displays, the thin stream of atmosphere escaping through a hairline crack in the viewport that the automated systems were struggling to seal. "We bought ourselves time," Kale finally said, unfastening his restraints and moving to access the maintenance panel beneath the secondary console. But without significant repairs. He didn't need a finish. They both understood the precariousness of their position. "I will check storage compartments," Lyra decided, rising from the pilot's seat. Survey vessels typically carry repair supplies. They worked methodically over the next several hours, assessing damage, identifying critical failures, and implementing temporary solutions with the limited tools and materials available. The shuttle had been designed for a single occupant's brief exploratory missions, not as a long-term survival vessel for two fugitives. Power stabilized at 17%, Kale reported after successfully bypassing a damaged regulator. Enough to maintain minimal life support and passive sensors for approximately 72 hours. Lyra emerged from the cramped engine compartment, her skin smudged with hydraulic fluid that contrasted sharply with the faint amber glow her epidermis had assumed, a color Kale had come to associate with intense concentration. "Port thruster beyond repair," she stated matter-of-factly. "Starboard functioning at 30% capacity. Enough for positioning adjustments only." The unspoken conclusion hung between them. They weren't going anywhere in this vessel. Not to the Alcyone trading hub. Not to any safe haven beyond Xylar or human space. Kale sank into the pilot's chair, rubbing his eyes with the heels of his palms. "We need to consider contingencies. If the hunters track us here, they will," Lyra interrupted, certainty in her voice. "Elite units do not abandon prey." The simple statement should have filled them with despair, yet Lyra's tone carried a strange note of professional admiration. One soldier acknowledging the capabilities of worthy opponents. She moved to stand beside Kale, her presence solid and grounding despite the dire circumstances. "But they expect desperation," she continued. "They expect us to run, to make mistakes. We will not." Kale looked up at her, a question in his expression. "We survived Vespera," Lyra reminded him. "A planet that should have killed us both many times over. We adapted. We endured." Her skin pulsed briefly with the deep blue that signified resolve. "This is simply another challenge." The confidence in her voice kindled something in Kale. Not quite hope, but a renewed determination that pushed back against fatigue and pragmatic pessimism. He nodded slowly. "All right, what's your assessment, Commander?" The use of her former title might have been coincidental, but Lyra straightened almost imperceptibly in response. For a moment, she was again the military strategist who had led troops through impossible scenarios, analyzing threats and opportunities with ruthless clarity. Hunter ships carry portable tracking devices, small, self-propelled probes that can navigate debris fields like this one, searching for energy signatures, thermal outputs, movement patterns. She paused, mentally calculating. If they followed our exit vector from Vespera, they will begin systematic sweep of this region within 20 hours. And we can't run, Kale concluded. So we hide, or we fight. With what weapons? The question wasn't rhetorical. Maya's shuttle carried only the small defensive array they'd used during their escape, barely adequate against small meteors, let alone a fully armed hunter vessel. Perhaps both, Kale suggested, a plan beginning to form. The debris field contains mining equipment. Some of it might be repurposed. Lyra caught his meaning immediately. Explosive charges for breaking down asteroid material. If they still exist, if we can find them, and if they're still functional after years of exposure to vacuum and radiation, Kale tempered. But yes, it was a desperate plan, filled with contingencies and unlikely successes. But as they began outlining the details, a curious thing happened. The tension that had filled the shuttle began to dissipate, replaced by the focused energy of purposeful action. They moved around each other with the synchronized efficiency that had developed during their time on Vespera, anticipating needs, complementing strengths, compensating for weaknesses. Hours passed as they prepared. Using the shuttle's remaining power, they conducted limited scans of the surrounding debris, identifying potential resources. Lyra repurposed the emergency beacon to emit a false signature that mimicked a different class of vessel. Kale created makeshift repairs to extend life support duration. During a brief rest period, as they shared a meager meal from the shuttle's emergency rations, Kale broke a comfortable silence. Why do you think they came for you? After all this time, Lyra considered the question, her expression thoughtful. Perhaps Teresh's betrayal was discovered. Perhaps my sacrifice failed to bring the promised prosperity. A bitter edge crept into her voice. Or perhaps they simply cannot tolerate the idea that I survived what was meant to kill me. Symbols are powerful, Kale agreed. My commanding officer once told me that a single survivor can undermine an entire narrative. That's why loose ends are dangerous. We are both loose ends, Lyra observed. Threads that refuse to be cut. And now we're weaving something new, Kale added quietly. The simple statement lingered between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate fully. Before either could elaborate, a proximity alert shattered the moment, soft but insistent, warning of an approaching object. Both moved instantly to action stations, all personal reflections set aside. Single target, Lyra reported, studying the sensor display. Too small for hunter ship. Probe, most likely. Entering outer perimeter of the debris field, Kale confirmed. Approach vector suggests it originated from the direction of Vespera. They watched in tense silence as the small dot on their screen navigated methodically through the debris, pausing periodically to conduct scans. Its path indicated a systematic search pattern, exactly as Lyra had predicted. Power down to minimal life support only, Kale whispered, though there was no way sound could travel through vacuum to the approaching probe. Passive sensors only. Lyra nodded, her skin shifting to the gray camouflage tones that represented her species' stress response, a biological adaptation that had once helped Xylar hide from predators on their evolving world. Now, that same instinctive response served in a very different kind of survival situation. The probe drew nearer, its path unwavering as it eliminated sectors of the debris field one by one. Soon it would reach their position. Discovery seemed inevitable. It's following our ion trail, Lyra realized suddenly. The damage to our engines left a distinctive signature. Kale's expression tightened. We can't outrun it. And if we destroy it, the hunters will know exactly where to look, she finished. They had prepared for this contingency, but both had hoped for more time. Kale reached for the makeshift detonator they had assembled, a crude device connected to the small explosive charges they had managed to salvage from abandoned mining equipment. Not yet, Lyra cautioned, watching the probe's approach with narrowed eyes. We must time it precisely. Too soon, and the hunters will know it was deliberate. Too late, the unspoken alternative hung between them. As the probe closed within 500 meters, Lyra's hand covered Kale's on the detonator. Now we give them what they expect, she said quietly. a desperate attempt to flee. Understanding her intention, Kale engaged the shuttle's remaining thruster in a short, powerful burst, as though they had panicked upon detecting the probe. The sudden movement sent them careening into a different section of the debris field, energy signature now unmistakable. The probe immediately adjusted course, accelerating toward their new position. As it closed the distance, Lyra nodded to Kale. Together, they pressed the detonator. The explosion rippled through the debris field in a carefully orchestrated sequence, not centered on their position, but forming a pattern that suggested a vessel attempting to create a diversion before escaping in the opposite direction. Through their viewports, they watched as the probe paused its pursuit, systems likely recalibrating to process the new data. Then, as they had hoped, it changed course to follow the false trail away from their actual location. It worked, Kale breathed, the tension in his shoulders easing marginally. For now, Lyra cautioned. The probe will report to the hunter ship. They will analyze the pattern, recognize the diversion for what it is. But it buys us time to implement the next phase, he countered, already moving toward the equipment they had prepared. Lyra nodded agreement, her skin shifting from defensive gray to the amber of focused determination. They expect us to run. She repeated her earlier assessment. We will not give them what they expect. For the next several hours, they worked tirelessly to prepare their true defense. Using the shuttle as bait had been only the first step in a strategy that relied on misdirection and calculated risk. Now came the more difficult part, transforming their apparent vulnerability into unexpected strength. As they worked, Lyra found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. On Vespera, facing death, she had been resigned, empty of hope or purpose. Now, despite the dangers that surrounded them, she felt more alive than she had in years. Each breath, each action held meaning beyond mere survival. She glanced at Kale, who was methodically adapting components from the shuttle's non-essential systems into something new. His focus, his determination, his willingness to face impossible odds. These qualities had earned her respect long before she had acknowledged the deeper connection forming between them. "What?" he asked, catching her gaze. "I was thinking," she replied honestly, "that the council chose better than they knew when they selected Vespera as my place of execution." Kale's brow furrowed. "How so?" "It was meant to kill me," Lyra explained. "Instead, it gave me reason to live again." The simple admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than any lengthy declaration might have been. After a moment, Kale's expression softened. "Vespera has a way of stripping things down to essentials," he agreed. "No room for pretense when you're fighting to survive each day." "No room for fear," Lyra added. "Only truth." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, a wordless exchange that required no translation across species. Then, with silent agreement, they returned to their tasks, preparing to face whatever came next, together, as they had faced everything since that first moment when Lyra had opened her eyes to find a human holding her, offering hope when she had expected only darkness. Outside the damaged shuttle, the debris field drifted in its eternal orbit, silent witness to a bond formed across the stars, across species, across the divide of worlds that had cast them both aside. And somewhere beyond, moving inexorably closer, hunters approached, unaware that their prey had ceased to flee and now prepared to stand their ground. The loose ends refused to be cut. The threads continued to weave together, forming something new, something unexpected, something strong enough to challenge the very forces that sought to unravel them. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The hunter ship arrived 18 hours later, its distinctive silhouette appearing at the edge of the debris field like a predator scenting blood. From their vantage point deep within the floating maze of abandoned equipment and asteroid fragments, Lyra and Kale watched its approach on the shuttle's failing sensor display. Standard containment formation, Lyra observed, recognizing the tactical pattern. They're deploying a blockade net to prevent escape while the main vessel moves in for capture. Kale nodded grimly. "Just as you predicted. Elite hunters are trained to be methodical," she explained. They will assume we're still on the move, try to find an exit vector through the debris. The display flickered, then stabilized, showing multiple smaller signatures breaking off from the main vessel. Hunter pods, designed for close-quarters pursuit in complex environments. 4 in total, each taking a different quadrant of the massive debris field. They're thorough, Kale remarked, making final adjustments to the complex arrangement of salvaged, mining charges and repurposed shuttle components they had assembled. They're Xylar, Lyra replied simply, as though this explained everything. Perhaps, to her it did. Silence fell as they completed preparations, each lost in private thoughts as the hunters drew inevitably closer. Their plan was risky, dependent on precise timing and the hunters behaving exactly as Lyra had anticipated they would. If any element failed, capture or death awaited them. Lyra, Kale said suddenly, his voice quiet but intense. If this doesn't work, it will, she interrupted, her skin rippling briefly with determined blue. But if it doesn't, he persisted, I want you to know that I don't regret finding you on Vespera. Whatever happens next, that moment, he paused, searching for words across the gulf of different languages, different species. That moment changed everything. For the better. Lyra studied him, her large, silver-blue eyes unblinking. Among Xylar, such personal declarations were rare, considered almost taboo in military contexts. Emotions were expressed through skin color, through subtle pheromone changes, not through words that could be misinterpreted or manipulated. Yet she found herself responding, the human method of communication feeling strangely right for this moment. When I opened my eyes and saw you, she said carefully, I thought I was hallucinating. A final mercy before death. She moved closer, one hand reaching out to touch his face, a gesture she had observed humans use but had never attempted herself. I am grateful. It was not a hallucination. The contact lingered, bridging differences in biology, in culture, in entire evolutionary paths that had developed light years apart. Then, with the disciplined focus that had defined both their careers, they returned to the task at hand. 3 minutes until the first hunter pod reaches our sector, Kale reported, checking the sensors. Lyra nodded, moving to the pilot station, initiating Phase 1. With precise timing, she activated the shuttle's emergency beacon, modified to emit specific frequencies that would draw immediate attention. The sudden energy signature would read to the hunters as a desperate attempt at communication or a system malfunction. Either way, it would confirm their location and accelerate the hunters' approach. Beacon active, she confirmed. Now we wait. The minutes stretched, tension building as the nearest hunter pod altered course, heading directly for their position.